Welcome to our weekly roundtable discussion by Law Enforcement Coaching, where each week we have unscripted conversations on relevant topics for law enforcement and our first responder community. This week we have a special haunted episode with retired officers, UAP investigators, and UAP-PD founders, Dave Rich and Marianne Robb. We appreciate you tuning in and hope you find some useful insights and information from these discussions.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here, and thank you to those that are tuning in. We are in Halloween season, so we decided to have a very fun, and this is one of my favorite topics to talk about, but we're doing a little bit of a spooky, haunted ghost story episode, and we are joined by special guests. But before I introduce them, everybody should know Chris and I, we are the founders of Law Enforcement Coaching. And Dave and Marianne, will you please introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about who you are?
My name is Marianne Robb. I was a police officer in Arizona for 34 years. And I worked many assignments with the department, from detectives to patrol. And I really enjoyed working patrol. And the reason for that is that, I'm out there in a patrol car all by myself, whether I work day shift, night shift, and you are under that big open sky. And one thing is, I was always hoping that maybe I would see something maybe in the sky, or maybe even something on land, that I couldn't explain. But unfortunately, I haven't. So during my career, I also joined an organization called MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, out in the Phoenix area. And while I was doing that, we were field investigators and did numerous cases with them. One thing about the MUFON is that all they're doing is UFOs, UFO cases. And that's the one thing about them is that, wait a minute, I've heard not only are there UFOs, but there's also cryptids, Bigfoot, skinwalkers, and ghosts, and the paranormal. And I'm thinking, you know what? Not only does everybody, normal people, I should say, just the regular citizens, but there's law enforcement out there that are probably seeing something that they can't explain, when they're out, like I did, under the big open sky, working patrol, day shift, night shift. And that's one of the things why we started UAP-PD. I'll kind of get into that a little bit more in a few minutes. I'd like to explain what UAP-PD is all about.
Awesome.
My name is Dave Rich. I'm a former police officer, 25 plus years. During that time, started in patrol, worked in investigations, ended my career in school resource officers. And unlike Marianne, where she didn't have an experience, I actually did have an experience of a sort. And it kind of led me and her into the idea of creating this organization that she's going to talk about real quick called UAP-PD.
That's it. Okay, so UAP-PD is Unidentified Anomalous Phenomenon PD for Police Department. And what that is listening to Dave is, I never had any experiences, whether UFOs, paranormal, cryptids. I never had anything. I kind of got into all this from my late husband, who was really into that. He asked me if I would come to a meeting, a MUFON meeting. I did. And that's how I got my feet wet into MUFON. But I never thought anything about this. But I'm thinking, you know what? There's got to be officers, law enforcement, first responders that have seen something they can't explain. So after a MUFON meeting one time, I was talking to Dave, and I said, we were talking back and forth about what's going on. You got all these pilots, and you've got military talking about these sightings that they see, and we're thinking, well, does law enforcement have anything like this? And then Dave looks at me with his smirky grin that he has. And he goes, I know exactly why they're not talking if they do see something. And, I forgot about the incident that he had back in 2017 with a ghost calling 911. And he'll share that story. I want to make sure he shares that story with you. But we're like, wow, you know what? If he had that incident and he never spoke about it for over 6 years until he retired, and the stress that put him that he had inside of him through this whole time, I knew that there had to be other law enforcement officers. You know, there's what, over 800,000 law enforcement officers working 24/7, and they're outside. Again, they're under the big open sky. You know, they're seeing something. So that's why we decided to start this organization to help law enforcement and first responders when they do see something they can't explain. They need to understand that there is a quote unquote, as I put it, a safe zone for them to come share their experiences with us. And they could either remain absolutely anonymous or they can, you know, identify themselves. It's up to them. But get that stress off of them. I mean, this is my case in point right here, is it affected him for several years, you know, while he was still working. The one thing about also UAP-PD and MUFON is a great organization, but all they do is they concentrate on reports of UFOs and entities. We do all three, and I'll have Dave explain about that.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Yeah, real
Explain
quick.
that.
The reason that I think we're different than like a MUFON organization is that when you think of MUFON or if different paranormal organizations, they approach it from the perspective of we are investigating UFOs, or we are investigating the paranormal, or we are investigating Bigfoot. What makes us different is we're not really investigating any of those. We want to help cops. We want to help firefighters. We want to help first responders. What we want to help them with happens to be stuff of the paranormal variety. And the reason for it is, like Marianne said, is we located this like gap in the system here. And it really came out when she was talking with a friend and they kind of called me about this. And I was at that exact moment where I said, well, I can tell you exactly why police officers aren't talking about it. And in the UFO community, there's a lot of conspiracy theories. There's a lot of people that think that, hey, you know, the government knows everything and they're not talking and stuff like that. And I think a lot of times what people do is they lump law enforcement and first responders in that same category of they're all part of this grand network that's trying to hide what the truth is. And it has nothing to do with that at all. It has to do with the fact that these officers and firefighters and first responders are experiencing something that they were not ready for. And what I mean by that is this. Chris can attest to it, Marianne, myself. We all went through a police academy. They trained us great. They trained us very, very well on how to deal with shoplifters and robbery suspects and burglaries, how to investigate a crime, how to take a report. But they never taught us, what do you do if all of a sudden you are confronted with something that is so outside the scope of what your conscious mind can wrap your brain around that there is no answer for you at that moment. And that's basically what happened with me is I had that experience and I was left going the entire time that I went into it. I was told by my sergeant at the time, basically the long story short is we got a 911 call at a high school that sounded like a girl's voice that said, I'm scared. They end up dispatching patrol to the school because it was a Saturday at like 11:54 in the morning. They get there, they make entry, they can't find anyone in there, but they find the phone that was left on the counter. Because the way that the call came in, the voice says, I'm scared. Dispatcher first says, 911, what's your emergency? Voice says, I'm scared. Dispatcher says, what was that? Says it again, I'm scared. She says, you're scared? It says no. And then you literally hear the phone receiver get dropped onto the countertop. So patrol gets sent to the school because it's a Saturday. There's no classes in session. They go in, they make entry. One officer finds the phone right there. It's still an open line, 14 minutes of the dispatcher trying to get somebody to pick up. He picks up the phone, has a conversation with the dispatcher. So we know with 100% certainty that this phone call came in from that phone. They proceed to search the entire building. They can't find anyone in there. When they go walking into the nurse's office, though, The two officers kind of enter side by side, and then one was gonna break right, one was gonna break left. And as they get into the room, they literally feel something push past them, hitting both of them on the shoulder and pushing their way out. Except there was nothing there. They didn't see anything. They both run out and look around and there's nothing there. So I get involved in this case because it was my school. That night that it happened, it was prom. So I show up at prom, the principal looks at me and says, "Hey, did you hear about the 911 call at the school today?" And I look at him, I'm like, "What 911 at the school? I mean, it's a Saturday. Why would there be a 911? He's like, "So you don't know about it?" I was like, "No." He's like, "Oh, you need to call somebody." So I'm like, "Okay." So I called dispatch. I'm like, "Hey, was there a 911 call at my school today?" And the dispatcher was like, "Oh my God, you need to talk to this particular officer." So I send him a text because I had his number. I was like, "Dude, did you get sent to my school?" And his response was literally, "Dude, your school is profanity haunted." And I'm like, "Okay, I've been there since it opened. I haven't noticed anything." So I end up getting a hold of him and I'm like, "What happened?" And so he proceeds to tell me the story. So at the time, like I told you, hardcore skeptic at the time, didn't really believe in much of anything like this. So I don't think much of it. I'm just thinking, hey, I'm going to go back to work. I make the mistake of telling my sergeant at the time. He then looks at me and goes, "Well, you need to do an investigation." And I'm like, "Why do I need to do an investigation?" And he says, "Well, because it was misuse of 911. And I'm like, "And who am I going to arrest? Because like we don't have anybody there." So I end up doing this entire investigation. We run down every possible lead, and I mean everything. I verified that that phone was the phone number that it came back to 911 with. I verified that it wasn't from a classroom and got transferred through. I verified that nobody tapped into the phone line and ended up making a prank call, because none of that stuff explains how the receiver got off the hook and it was an open line when the officer got there. I ran down every possible lead. I ended up coming up with, I got the audio from the 911. I got the video from the school security at the school. The phone in question is almost dead center of the screen where it happened. At the time that that phone call comes in, there is nobody standing at that phone. And then I watch the officers 14 minutes later walk in and pick up the phone and have a conversation with the dispatcher that I have. I sent the audio recording out to some people at MUFON that we knew to analyze the audio recording. While that's going on, I start poking around asking. I ended up hearing from one of the counselors that the lady who used to work at the front desk was a psychic medium and claimed to talk to dead people. And I'm like, okay, so I go and have a conversation with her. She's like, "Well, yeah, I do, but no, I never talk to anybody here at school. I don't ever do that at school. I never do anything. And when I do it, I know how to close it and I don't, and I'm like, okay, right, cool." So she claims she has no knowledge of it whatsoever. So then I realized that, hey, something happened in the nurse's office, so maybe I'll go talk to the nurse. And so the nurse happened to be the wife of a sheriff's deputy. So I had known her at this point for 6 years. I'd been at the school. So I walk in and she was a very outgoing personality, very friendly, very outgoing. So I walk in and I strike up a conversation with her. She's friendly. She's, normal reaction, until I get to the topic of, hey, we had this weird 911 call at the school and the officers came in here and they felt something that they couldn't see. And she gets all of a sudden really quiet when I say that. Like, "Nope, I don't know anything about that." Just very short. And so I'd been an officer for a little while at that point, and I'm like, "Yeah, that's what we call a clue." So I'm like, okay, so maybe I'll take a moment, back off, and change the topic, and we talk about something else. And then I come back a couple hours later, and and again, friendly, outgoing, until I get to that topic, and then she completely shuts down again. So now I know she knows more than what she's telling me. But I let it go because, again, I'm not going to harass the school nurse over this. So I leave. I figure I'll give it a couple of days and then I'll come back and talk to her again. During that time, I look at the video again. I see that I analyze the video from 6 o'clock in the morning till after the officers get there. I see a security guard walk in through the back door. She goes nowhere near the desk where the phone is. There's 3 ways into the building. 2 of them are on the camera. The other one is back around the corner. There's no way that you can get to that desk where that phone is without being seen on this camera. There's 3 sets of motion detecting lights, one in front of the desks, one right over the desk, and one behind the desk. When the guard came in at like 7:20, she had to grab some stuff. They had Pop Warner football going, so she was grabbing some stuff to make signs to tell people how to get to the restroom. So the outside set of lights come on because she only goes over to a supply closet. After 20 minutes, they shut off. At about 10:20, the lights just over the desk click on. Not in front of the desk, not behind the desk. So at that moment, I look at this, I go, how did that happen? Because the only way to get to that desk is you have to come from one of 2 directions. How come the lights on either side didn't click on, just the ones over the desk? After 20 minutes, those click back off. Now, at the time that the phone call comes in, it's 11:54 in the morning, so it's light outside. So there's enough light in the room that you can see that there's nobody standing at the phone when the phone call comes in. 14 minutes later, I see shadows at the bottom of the screen, which are the 2 officers entering from the bottom of the screen. They walk over. I see one pick up the phone, have a conversation. The other one starts looking. Interesting part, when I see the 2 of them, the nurse's office is at the bottom of the screen. You see the 2 of them. There's not a camera in the nurse's office, but you can see the 2 of them enter the room. And about 3 seconds later, you see the 2 of them run out looking around, like trying to see something. So at this point, everything is matching up perfectly. At this time, I also get the results back from the the audio analysis. And the guy from MUFON calls me up. He's like, hey, look, I don't know what you got here. It sounds like a human voice, but that ain't a human voice. And I'm like, well, what is it? He's like, I have no idea. But more importantly, it doesn't say I'm scared. And I was like, what does it say? And so he amplifies and plays it, and it actually says, I scare. And so in response, so then all of a sudden I realized that was an intelligent response, because the dispatcher asked, you're scared? And it says, no, and then drops the phone. And this was like conversation tone. This wasn't like how you'll see sometimes on television shows where they'll be like, I ask a question and 20 minutes later there's a response. This was like within seconds. It was like 2 people having a phone call conversation. So I'm like, okay, that's weird. So I go back over to the nurse now a couple days later, walk back in, and I'm like, hey, how's it going? She's outgoing, friendly, until I bring up the topic of the ghost, we assume, I don't know. And all of a sudden she just slams her pen down and goes, fine, I'll tell you. And I'm like, tell me what? And she proceeds to tell me that for her entire childhood and entire life, she has had an attachment. She's had a ghost that follows her every time she moves. When she moves from a house to a different house, everything's peaceful for about a week and a half, and then all this activity starts up again. And the activity that she described was like your typical, what you would think of as a typical haunted house. Like she'll be sitting downstairs and she'll hear footsteps upstairs when she knows she's alone. Doors will slam when she knows that there's nobody there. The dog will start barking at the corner when there's nobody there. And I'm like, what the heck? And so she proceeds to tell me this. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me this before when we were talking? And she told me that 3 weeks ago, everything at her house stopped and it was completely peaceful at her house. And I'm like, then why are you telling me now? And she said, last night, everything started again at the house. So I ended up going back and checking with dispatch, because I had heard rumors that, hey, that wasn't the first 911 call there. 3 weeks prior, we had a 911 call. And then a week before, we'd had another 911 call, all coming from that phone. But the first 2 times, officers never made entry because it was a 911 call with no voice and nobody talking. So the only reason the officers went in was because there was a literal voice talking to them. So I end up finding this out. I'm like, holy cow. So I go back and tell my sergeant. He thinks it's amazing. People's word starts getting out about it. People start talking. And then about a week later, I got called upstairs to Detective Sergeant's office. And he had the video on one screen and he had the audio. And he played all this to me and he looks at me and goes, you expect me to believe this? And I look at him and I go, I don't really care what you believe. Like, this has nothing to do with you. And so he proceeded to accuse me of lying. He accused me of making it all up. And he told me to stop talking about it. And so I walked out of the office, and after there was a little bit of a blow up there because this sergeant and I had both been hired at about the same time. And so I said some things, he said some things, I walked out of the room, and I started going downstairs. And as I'm walking downstairs, I realized, if you say anything about this, your career could be over. Because you have just been told by a sergeant, a supervisor, to not talk about this. And so then it all of a sudden started flooding kind of like into my head. This is a real problem. Like, if people start talking about this and they start thinking that I'm talking about it after I've just been told that I can't talk about it, I could really get into a lot of trouble. And at that point, I was like, I have 6 years left before I'm going to retire. I had a wife and kids. I'm like, I can't get fired right now. I just need to keep my mouth shut. So I kept my mouth shut for 6 years. I now no longer work for that department, so they can't tell me what to do. But the important thing that I learned during those 6 years is that officers and first responders that are seeing these things, they're not keeping it secret because they're part of some big conspiracy. They're keeping it secret because there's a stigma associated with it that can be everything from other officers, because trust me, I had other officers commenting, making joking comments, all sorts of things, all the way up to potentially getting fired if in a situation like this, had I kept talking. Where does that sergeant go? He starts an IA against me. He starts to, I'm now not paying, I'm now disrespecting his authority. My career is over. And so when Marianne called me that day and was asking, well, why don't officers talk about this? I'll tell you exactly why they don't talk about it. It has nothing to do with being part of a grand conspiracy, and everything to do with the fact that society doesn't quite believe that this is real on a level where you can feel comfortable coming forward and saying it. And we saw this because once we started this organization, and I'm sorry I'm talking so much, but we've interviewed numerous officers who have come forward willing to tell us about what they had. And I remember there was a distinct incident where we were talking to a couple of officers that worked on one of the reservations out here. And when I mentioned my story to them, they looked at me like I was crazy. They're like, what do you mean you couldn't talk about it? And I kind of explained everything about it. And they looked at me and they're like, well, that's not a problem for us. And it started this whole side conversation about the fact that on the reservation, everything from star people to spirits to skinwalkers, cryptozoological creatures, they're all part of the culture. They're all accepted. They're all things that, like, it's like when somebody says, hey, did you see that payphone? Well, yeah, I couldn't tell you where there's a payphone now, but I know they existed. That's the same type of mindset almost that they have there, where it's like, not everybody has seen one, but it's accepted as being part of their culture and part of their belief. So the officers and first responders, they don't even bat an eye. If somebody says, oh yeah, the officer saw a little person, nobody's going to even bat an eye, because they're going to be like, oh yeah, I have an uncle that saw those. Yeah. And so basically the whole crux of this was, until society off the res can have a level of understanding of society on the reservations, I think we're always going to have these officers, these first responders that are going to experience stuff and not know what to do about it, because they're not accepted for what they saw. Their careers could be in jeopardy. And not only that, is it comes down to the whole, nobody wants to be looked at like they're crazy. And the reality is they're not crazy. They're seeing things that they can't understand. And I love to use this example for people. We don't know what it is. That doesn't mean that it's not real. It doesn't mean that it's crazy. Because if I went back in time 100 years and pulled out a cell phone, nobody back then was going to know what that is, because they're like, what the heck is this crazy technology? And if I took like a piece of technology from 100 years ago and went 100 years further back and showed them that technology, they would look at it the same way those first people looked at the cell phone. So how do we know that all of this stuff that we're experiencing isn't just stuff that we just don't understand yet? And maybe at some point, this could help us move towards a period where we can understand it. And I'm sorry, I talked a lot, but she's gonna.
No, it's great.
And no,
I love it. Well, you're right. Everything is energy. And, some people are a little bit tuned in more than others, but there's frequencies, there's all sorts of different things. And I have stories. So I grew up in Washington State. And when I was a kid, I had some experiences that made me be like, huh. And I was always interested in that kind of stuff, but it wasn't until I lived on Maui. And Maui, that is also a culture where they have night marchers. The spirit realm, it's accepted and it's talked about, and it's just, yes, that's a thing. And I ended up owning a bar, a little rundown local dive bar that was in Wailuku. A lot of history there, and right next to a mortuary. So you can put a couple $1 million cash on the table I'm not going to change my story. I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. We know what we felt. There was, it was St. Patrick's Day. We had really old, security camera, which wasn't that great. But the back of the bar is where we had the beer and all the extra stuff. And there's a back door. But when we had live music, I had to have that closed because I had to stay, within sound parameters. The band is playing. And I thought it was my friend. And out of the corner of my eyes at the register, and I watched somebody walk in the back wearing green. And I was like, why is she back there? And I look and she's singing. And I'm like, well, that's not her. I'm like, somebody's in the back of my bar. So I go running back there. The door's closed. The latch is there. There's nothing there. And I'm like, and everybody knew, we knew that my bar there was a guy that walked in the back. There's a girl that sat by the front door. And then there was transient stuff that would come in and out. So I'm there. I pull a chair. I'm going through the security footage. And everybody's like, what's wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm like, this is the face of somebody that just saw a ghost. I'm trying to find it. And then I have stories for days. Chris, you have some stories too?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I have a main story, but I'm not going to share that. The only thing I will say is when I was in the homicide unit, I did do an investigation where everything went dead, and I don't mean not to be funny about it, but everything went nowhere, I should say. And so I did do something to look into the paranormal side of things. And at first, some of the detectives that heard about what I was going to do, they wanted to be a part of it, but they wanted to be a part of it to kind of make fun of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is not something you play with. This is something at the time I looked at it as being very serious. I'm trying to figure this out, what's happening over here. And then, we recorded some things. Like you, Dave, and Marianne, we're very analytical. We go off of evidence. That's what we're evidence-based, right? We're not just going to take somebody's word for it. Does the evidence back up what we heard, what we saw, or what somebody is saying, right? And so I recorded that entire night, played it back a few nights later, and there were some things that were caught on the audio, and it was a little startling. I played it back for some of the detectives, and when they heard that, they wanted nothing to do with it. When they heard the audio of whatever it was that came back on it, and I don't know what I captured, but you should have seen the look on their faces. All of a sudden, they're like, "Holy shit, this is real!" And then they walked away. They wanted nothing to do with it. So it kind of goes back to this sergeant that you were talking about. Sometimes people don't want to admit that there's something else out there because it doesn't fall in line with what we have created, our pattern of life. And if we can't explain it, it disrupts things, and we don't want to have to deal with that disruption. So it's just easier to say, you're lying, Dave. You didn't really find that out. That doesn't exist. And, in my opinion, that's a cop-out way of just saying, wiping your hands of it and saying, I didn't do it. Because this is the individual that came to you and said, do an investigation into this matter. To be honest with you, Dave, if I would have got that call on patrol, I wouldn't have looked into it other than it was just a 911 hang up and patrol didn't find anybody there. Done. I would not have followed up like you did because your sergeant told you to. And then when you found out all this information, then you're being told you're a liar. How did you write that up in a report and put that in a DR? What did you do with that?
I did not put it in the DR because I didn't know how to put it in the DR. So I know that a call was created because they went out there. But as I started, because again, and I had this conversation with my nephew about it when I told him about the story. And he was like, well, weren't you scared? And I was like, no, I wasn't scared. He's like, how could you not be scared? It was terrifying. And I'm like, no, because you got to remember at the time, kind of like what you said, I was 100% convinced that there was some logical explanation. I was going to find out that it was either kids in one of the classrooms that ended up finding a way to patch through to the front desk, or it was going to be somebody that patched in like a computerized voice thing that they maybe hacked the system. The entire time, I was 100% convinced that I was going to find a logical answer to it. So I'm writing notes and I'm doing stuff. And it wasn't until I got to the point where I'm like, I can't explain this. And so before I even had a chance to write anything was when I got called upstairs and told, don't talk about it. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to write anything about it because they told me not to talk about it. So I'm sure not going to put it in a report. But again, it was like that whole, like I said, is like exactly like what you hit on. I'm convinced that that sergeant was the same way, that what I found did not fit into his world. And because it did not fit into his world, he was having none of it. And so he told me, shut up, I don't want to know about it, you're lying, this isn't real. And it was like his way of coping with the fact that what I uncovered, I couldn't explain. And I mean, and on a certain level, I'm glad that it happened. On another level, it was 6 years of my life that I was not very happy. But it was interesting to be put in that position because of what you said. We handle everything logically. So the way that I approached it was the way that I would approach any other investigation. I was going to try and find the guy that I was going to arrest for somehow hacking into the school system and getting on the phones and making a bogus 911 call. And so when I approached it that way and following up that way, by the time I got to the end, I couldn't do what my normal reaction was at the time, because like I said, even I had a hard time with it. My normal reaction would have been like, oh, well, there's a logical explanation. I just don't, but I had already run them all down. So I'm like, oh, well, it can't be a ghost, because I mean, like, it had to be, no, I already looked into that. Well, then no, I already looked into that. Well, then no, I looked into that too. And so you finally get to that point where you're like, wow, I cannot explain this. Now, that's not to say 50, 100 years from now, we're not going to come up with what the answer is. But in this moment right now, I still can't explain it. And I hate saying that it was a ghost, because that to me seems like a cop out. Like, on a certain level, I'm like, I don't want to say it is, because I don't know if it is truly, because I don't really know what it is. All I can say is it was nothing that I could prove that was mundane. Now, we've talked since starting UAP-PD, I still have that audio recording and that security footage. I've played it for people. I've explained the situation, everything that the nurse told me to certain people, and they are 100% convinced that it was a ghost. I'll tell you this much, I don't know what it was, but it was messed up. And so but again, like, for 6 years, I had nobody to talk about it with. And that's what kind of gets us back to what we're trying to do here, because our big thing with UAP-PD is, I don't care if officers come forward and don't want us to use their name. They don't want us to talk about their story. I just want to make sure that they know that they have a place that they can go to talk about it, because it's not fun to sit there and have experienced something and feel that moment of dread and that moment of like, I can't talk about this and I don't know where to go. And so, like, I know your background, Chris. You, like me, we want to help people. You do it in certain ways. I'm trying to do it in ways that are slightly different. But when it all boils down to it, we're just like, and I say this all the time during our presentations. When we were on the job together, we were willing to take a bullet for each other. I'm still willing to take a bullet, just not a physical bullet, like this kind of bullet, this kind of emotional trauma. And so we've been reaching out to these officers. We've been trying to gather stories just to give them an opportunity to get it off their chest, because you can't have any true healing until you get it out, right? I mean, you can't start the process of understanding, start the process of trying to get, not, I don't want to say pass it, but accept it, until you actually get it out and say, this is what I truly experienced.
Case in point on what Dave just said was this past year, I spoke with a gentleman, retired state of Arizona, worked for the prison system. He's had 4 different encounters throughout his career. And one was actually an entity going into his bedroom on a UFO situation there. But he broke down and started crying and says, "Thank you. Nobody was believing me. And I couldn't say anything." And this has been going on for 20 some odd years with him. And he just broke down and cried. And to this day, even though he's retired, he still does not want to be identified, because he's thinking if the state of Arizona finds out that he shared these encounters with me, they'll take away his pension.
Mhm.
But he just needed to get it out. It was really eating inside of him.
Yeah, we have friends who work for the prison system, and they too have stories about it as well. And they've seen things also, and they are, the most some of the most credible people, that we've ever met, right? And that's the thing about what you guys do when you're talking with other law enforcement and first responders. You're dealing with a level of credibility because of how we're trained, because we're not trained to believe in everything that people tell us, right? So we have to make that investigation. Now, Dave, with your case here, you don't have to say a ghost did it. You have enough. You have the nurse's statement, you have the officer's statement, you have the 911 call, you have the video surveillance, right? You have all of that. You don't have to say, "Oh, a ghost did this." The listener can make their own mind up right there, right? Because why? Because you gathered the evidence in that situation, right? And Marianne, you have a case that you talk about involving a person that we all know from work on that involved a reservation. Do you want to share that story?
Right,
The
you're talking about the cryptid, the skinwalker.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, I would
yes.
love to. Noah, I'm just gonna use his name, Noah. He has no problem with that. He came to me one day at work and he says, "I know what you do with MUFON and all. Can I tell you a story?" I said, "Sure." Says he was on his way up to Page. He was on State Route 89, which is in between Flagstaff, Arizona and Page, Arizona. This area, this roadway is a 2-lane, very, very dark roadway, and it's on the Navajo reservation. As he's going from Flagstaff, he's heading toward the turnoff of Tuba City, and it's about 10 o'clock at night, so he's cruising along pretty well. And as he is coming up, he sees something to the right side on the shoulder, on the right side of him. So he starts slowing way, way down. And all of a sudden he sees this creature on all 4s walk right in front of him, crossing the road from his right to his left. Now, this thing is on all 4s. The back of this creature is approximately 4 feet tall as it's walking. Now, any animal, if somebody's coming up in a car, that animal, boom, is going to take off real quick. This thing walked nonchalantly, very slowly across the road and stared back at Noah's car at this whole time. So after it crossed, he starts taking off again. This time he gets a little, he's now a little shaken up, going, "I better slow down in case, something else pops up and tries to cross the road." Approximately 2 miles later, he comes up, he sees something in the middle of the road now. And so he slows down to maybe 20 miles an hour. He's just creeping along, going past this thing. He sees what he believes is the same creature. This time it's sitting on its hind legs. And it is now staring as Noah's passing it. It is literally start to stare at him as he comes toward it and as he passes. All this thing is just sits there, doesn't move from the middle of the road, just sits there and watches the car pass. Well, being an investigator, he's like, "What in the world was that?" Now, mind you, this thing on its hind legs, Noah said that the top of his head was at least 5 feet tall because it was almost over the roof of his car. So he wanted to be an investigator. He wanted to turn around and see what in the world was this thing. Well, the sides of the roads were too soft. So thank goodness he did not try to go off the road and come back. So he says, I'm going to head into Page. I need people and I need light. I need to just get this out of my mind. It just kind of really freaked him out. Gets into a convenience store in Page, walks into the convenience store. There's people around. The clerk is a Navajo woman. And, she's very bubbly and all. So Noah grabs some snacks and a drink, goes up to the counter. Clerk's going, hi, how are you? Where are you going? Where are you coming from? And he goes, may I ask you a question? He goes, sure. Do you have any wolves or coyotes in this area? She goes, well, coyotes every once in a while, but not wolves. The terrain is not conducive for wolves. And she goes, why? Well, he proceeds to tell her the story about the two creatures that passed him on the road. Well, this Navajo woman went from being very bubbly to very serious. She packed his groceries in a bag, handed it to him very quickly, says, get out of my store now. He was totally confused. He had no clue what was going on. So that's why he came to share the story with me. Well, we have some really great friends, John Dover, Stan Milford Jr., who were the Navajo Rangers up there on the Navajo Reservation. They were federal police officers, and their job was to investigate all the paranormal and UFO activity up on the whole Navajo Reservation. So I proceeded to tell them what he told me, and he said what he saw and how the Navajo woman reacted to the story, he saw a skinwalker. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. The Navajo, I don't even want to call it legend, the beliefs is, first of all, you don't call and I know it's dark outside, but I'm going to say
my window, I'm like, okay.
Okay, I won't say it, but the SW, they will
there you go.
say it, they will do initials. Either you say the SW or SS. You don't say the word. Now, what this Navajo woman was thinking, because he came in and he encountered this, she was afraid that this SW attached itself to Noah's car, and he was bringing it to Noah, and he was bringing it into the store where she was. And if that would have happened, she would have had to get with a medicine man, and she would have had a ceremony done to smudge her or cleanse her, as they call it. That's why she wanted him out of the store as quick as possible. Now, I asked Noah if he would, since there was no pictures or anything, would he get with my sketch artist? And would he be able to have her draw what he saw, to explain, sketch artist, we all know what it is, that usually victims use for a suspect composite. Well, Noah did, and I don't have it with me right here. I could send it to you guys, but it is a wolf-looking creature that had its jaw hanging down, an elongated jaw, and it's very pronounced. And you could see the teeth and everything else. I'm looking at it. You would think it's cartoonish, but it wasn't. This is what a trained investigator saw that night on State Route 89, just, outside of Page. But it's real interesting what he saw.
And I was working patrol at the time. One morning, Noah pulled me in, and he shared that story with me. And I go, "Oh, you saw an SW, right?" And he kind of looked at me like, "Oh, you know about this stuff?" And I do know a little bit about that stuff. Does this Tami as well? And you could just see the look on his face, and he was explaining it to me. And we went into his office so nobody else could hear us. But yeah, that's interesting. And Noah's a very credible person, very analytical person too.
Yes.
So yeah, he doesn't make stuff up.
No.
All right, Tami, did you want to say something?
Well, yeah, I want to honor everybody's time, but I do want to, for the audience, for people tuning in, I want to offer a few different things. So one, if you have experienced something and you're not sure if there's somebody that you can talk to, You are surrounded now by people that you can talk to. You can reach out. I will put their contact information at the end of this roundtable so that you can reach out. Also, because in the line of work that you guys do, you are dealing with a lot of death. You're dealing with a lot of energies and places that you're going into, especially if you're working. Did anybody see that?
Whoa. Saw that. Yeah.
Are you
Yeah.
serious? No. Okay, I saw that. I got
Yeah.
I got chicken skin. There's no reflection in here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was weird.
There's no.
Yeah.
I talk with my hands, but okay. I am. Way to talk about SW,
I never see it. I saw it this time.
Well, that brings us to, I'm going to give you guys a little reference. This is not a paid for thing. This is something that I genuinely use and we'll be reading after this. So this one is the Practical Psychic Self-Defense Handbook. And it combats psychic attacks, evil spirits, and possession. I am very well versed and educated. I literally have a degree from, a master's in metaphysical science. So this is a good analytical, logical, not a woo-woo book. It's not just going to tell you to go burn some sage and call it good. It's going to tell you all about it. So this is a great book for first responders, especially to look at. You do want to make sure that you're protecting yourself. You want to make sure that you're protecting yourself before you go to these calls, if you can, if you know. There are, I put these on purpose. I have lava, not from Hawaii. I have obsidian. I have the evil eye. So I protected myself coming into this conversation. One of the other things that you want to do if you do have a heavy call is you want to cleanse yourself. You want to make sure that you are not taking stuff home with you. There are ways of protecting yourself. So if you feel like something is coming home, for those that do sage, do not sage at night. Don't do that. Wait for the day. You want to open up all the doors and windows in your house, and then you can do your prayer. Whatever your religious belief is, whatever that is, you can reach out for more information if you want to know how to smudge. But you smudge and you get everything to go out. You can send it to the light. You can send it to wherever it came back from. It's just not welcome to be in your area. The other thing that you can do is to salt your doors and your windows. That'll help protect bringing stuff in. And I have a long, long list of things that you can do to protect and clear because I had to learn. I had so many stories and so many things that happened to me when I was living on Maui that I had to learn to take it serious because I've been scratched. I've been spiritually attacked. I've had things follow. I've had weird phone calls as well to my phone from weird numbers, the gauntlet of stories. So for those, and the dog is snoring right now, so I don't know if anybody can hear that sound. That's not a ghost. That's my waffles. But you're not crazy. To anybody that's listening, if you've had these experiences that you're like, I don't know, you're not alone. You're not crazy. It is okay to talk about it. Just like with wellness, with this, it's okay to talk about it. And as we wrap this up, what else are there little pieces of advice or guidance that you guys all could share with our audience?
Well, first and foremost, I would say, kind of echoing what you just said, for those of you listening, if you've ever experienced something or if somebody you know has experienced something, you're not crazy. I have experienced stuff. Tami has experienced stuff. Chris has experienced stuff. You have an out now. We have a website, UAP-PD. We have a Facebook page, UAP.
Just UAP, and it's UAP-PD. Yeah.
Please reach out to us. Like I said, we're willing to listen. We're willing to give you that opportunity to talk. We can even help give you advice. We work with a number of people. I know a couple of really highly trained individuals that can probably help you out. 2 of which might be on the other line right here. But feel free to reach out to us. We would love to hear your story. We don't judge. And remember what I said, we were willing to take a bullet for you guys when we were on the job. We're still willing to take it. If you don't want to be identified, you don't have to be. We just want to make sure that you guys are safe. That's what it really comes down to.
And if somebody doesn't feel comfortable sharing our story over a Zoom or a telephone call, I'd be more than happy to go wherever they are, to meet with them and get their story in person. We have no problem doing that either.
And she really does. She flew to New York once to interview a guy.
Oh,
Nice.
that's awesome.
So yeah, so like we're serious about the whole.
Yeah.
If you are in another state and you want to talk, she's just looking for free trips anywhere. So she'll definitely be willing to come out and talk.
I feel that one. Chris, what
All
are
right,
your
well, thanks.
what
What,
do you
me?
have? Yeah, you.
No, I was just gonna say thank you for being here. I know we want to respect your time. I know you guys are gonna get on another call with somebody else to talk about this stuff. It's very, very interesting. And maybe we'll do another episode and talk a little bit more because I mean you guys have a bunch of stories that you could share. So
Definitely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go to the editing right now and go replay this in slow motion
Yes.
to find out what just happened here.
Oh my goodness, definitely.
Yes.
We all saw that.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys for having us on. It has been wonderful. We'd love to
Awesome.
come
Thank
back.
you guys. And thank you for what
Thank
you're
you.
doing
Awesome.
for everybody. Have a great
Yes.
one.
Thank you.
Until next
Okay.
week, everybody.
Thanks, guys.